September 1977. The damp, cold air enveloped Round Valley Lake, about 30 miles from the town of Clinton, New Jersey. The beam from Lieutenant Frank Marden's flashlight cut through the thick fog, reflecting off the still black water, illuminating something no one wanted to find. Control. I need more divers and a forensic team to the west shore of Round Valley Lake immediately. His voice echoed over the radio, mingling with the howling wind and the sound of water lapping against the rocky shore. What had started as a routine search for a missing person after a stormy night had turned into something entirely different, something that would answer questions haunting the town of Clinton for decades to come. A turquoise Buick Skylark was pulled from the lake's depths, its doors still locked, headlights shattered, containing two motionless figures inside. It was Linda Harper, 29, and her son Tommy, 5, mother and son, who had vanished without a trace 3 days earlier. From that night, their disappearance became the greatest obsession of the small lakeside community. 2 empty chairs at every Thanksgiving, 2 bedroom doors an aging mother could never bring herself to close. And beneath that calm water, what was called an accident would slowly reveal its true nature. Before continuing this story that shocked America, take a second to hit subscribe and like the video, because you're about to hear about a case where justice took 46 years to resurface. Fall 1977, Clinton, New Jersey, was cold and damp, as if holding a secret in its heart. The sky was cloaked in gray clouds, a light wind blowing through the bare trees along the main road leading to the outskirts. Linda Harper, 29, a bank employee in Flemington, hurriedly buttoned her wool coat as she stepped out from the old wooden porch. She called back into the house, her voice still carrying its usual gentleness. "Mom, I'm heading out. I'll be back early." Evelyn, her silver-haired mother, stood in the doorway, holding a kitchen towel, nodding without knowing it would be the last time. The turquoise Buick Skylark was parked close to the curb, reflecting the dim yellow streetlight. Tommy, the 5-year-old with curly hair and rosy cheeks, bounced in the back seat, clutching a small teddy bear. Linda buckled his seatbelt, turned on the radio, the announcer's voice droning, "Light showers expected in Hunterdon County, limited visibility at night." She flicked on the wipers, their steady rhythm blending with the quickening beat of a mother trying to balance work, a young child, and a lonely life after her husband's early death. The road from Clinton to Raritan stretched over 30 miles, flanked by gentle hills and maple forests, turning reddish bronze. Linda occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror, smiling as her son yawned, then turned down the radio to keep him from waking. She thought of the small concert in Raritan, where an old friend had invited her, a way to break the monotony of days spent between the bank and an empty house. When the dashboard clock showed 7:45 p.m., the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Linda slowed the car, headlights piercing the slick road. Outside, fog from Round Valley Lake spread thickly, white and opaque like a curtain. She knew this road, had driven it hundreds of times, but something today made her heart tighten, a feeling as if eyes were watching from the darkness. Tommy stirred, softly calling, "Mom?" Linda reassured him with a gentle hair ruffle and a light smile. The radio crackled again, the announcer's dry voice, "Visibility now under 100 yards. Use caution on the stretch around Round Valley Lake." She exhaled, gripping the steering wheel tighter, her mind focused only on getting home. At 8 p.m., a turquoise car turned onto a narrow curve by the lake, its headlights casting a faint green streak through the fog before disappearing from the road. No one heard brakes screech, nor saw taillights. Only the steady rain fell, and small ripples rose and faded, as if nothing had happened. At the end of the road, Evelyn's small house still glowed with light, the aging mother sitting by the window, eyes fixed on the dark front yard, waiting for headlights to appear on the horizon. But the road remained empty, and the old kitchen radio had stopped broadcasting the weather. After 8 p.m. that night, no one saw Linda Harper or her son again. Evelyn called the police at 2 a.m. Her voice, hoarse with fear, trembled as if she'd woken from a nightmare. On the other end, the dispatcher noted briefly, "A woman and child haven't returned after more than 7 hours." In the small town of Clinton, such calls were rare. In 1977, there were no GPS or cell phones. Missing person reports were scribbled with a ballpoint pen on faded yellow paper. Two night shift officers set out in a Plymouth Fury, headlights sweeping across bare trees along the road, rain still falling lightly, mist spraying the windshield. They arrived at Evelyn's at 2:40 a.m. She was still in her wool robe, clutching Linda's scarf, her face pale in the lamplight. "She's never this late," she said. If there was traffic or a storm, she'd call from a payphone. A young officer asked, which way was she headed? Evelyn pointed toward the window, to the road leading to Route 31, curving around Round Valley Lake. They took notes, promised to look. At 3:15, a signal went out over the local radio, mobilizing police and fire units. A temporary command post was set up at the intersection of Route 31 and Pleasant Run. On the hood of a patrol car, a paper map was spread out, pinned down with a water bottle. Lieutenant Frank Marden, Clinton's town cop, arrived at the scene, his leather jacket soaked, wide-brimmed hat dripping. He studied the map, his voice firm. "Start at the north side of the lake, follow the curve, look for tire tracks, clothing, anything that's washed up." The team dispersed, each holding a flashlight as big as a wrist, its dim yellow beam piercing the fog. On the east shore of Round Valley Lake, two firefighters found small glass fragments on the road, wet with rain. When they shone their lights, the glass reflected faintly, not enough to identify its type. Nearby were long tire skid marks, but wind and water had blurred their edges. Marden knelt, touched the mud, and said softly, "She might have skidded, but no brake marks." Another officer asked, "What color's her car?" "Buick Skylark, turquoise." They looked out at the lake, shrouded in fog, thick as cigarette smoke. By morning, over 30 volunteers had joined, including locals and young men from the Clinton Fire Station. One group took a motorboat, another probed the shore with poles. That afternoon, divers began their search. Bill Chambers, a diver who'd served in the Navy, donned an old rubber suit, oxygen line slung over his shoulder. He held a large glass mask, looked at the murky lake, and said quietly, "This water corrodes even memories, I swear." A rudimentary sonar machine, heavy as an iron cabinet, was brought in, emitting a steady tick-tick-tick as it scanned the depths. Marden and two officers watched the blurry black and white display. Only vague bright spots, no clear shapes. "There's something down there," Bill said after his second dive, his voice heavy with water over the radio. "A big mass, not a rock, but the water's too murky to see." Marden leaned in, straining to hear, then replied over the radio, "Mark that spot with a buoy. We'll come back tomorrow morning." For the next 3 days, the weather grew colder, and the wind picked up. Each morning, divers went back into the water, thick mud clinging to their masks, undercurrents pulling them from shore. Bill surfaced after one dive, gasping, his face pale. "Can't see past 3 feet. Whatever's down there is buried deep." Marden squinted at the mirror-smooth lake, his voice hoarse. "Keep going. I don't believe a car vanishes without a trace." But the more they searched, the more hopeless it seemed. The equipment buzzed with interference. The initial metal trace disappeared, as if something was hiding in the depths. On the 4th day, there were no results. The press began to shift the narrative. The Hunterdon County Democrat's front page read, "Could the Harper disappearance be a voluntary departure?" The article quoted an anonymous source close to the police. Linda might have been facing financial trouble or depression after her husband's death. The town started to buzz with rumors. At the diner on the main road, people speculated, maybe she just took off with the kid. Strange though, no one saw the car go off. Women like that, sometimes they do crazy things. Evelyn read the paper, her hands trembling, lips pursed tight. She went to the command post, found Marden, her voice raspy. "They're lying. My daughter didn't run away. She loved her son more than life itself." Marden looked at her, eyes averted. "I understand, Mrs. Harper, but there's no evidence of a crime. Her car might have gone into the lake, or she left the state." Evelyn shook her head. "Frank, I raised her for 29 years. She never left Tommy alone. Never. Her voice broke in the wind. That evening, Marden stood alone by the lake's edge. A faint moon reflected on the oil-black water. He lit a cigarette, the smoke dissolving in the wind. In the distance, patrol car lights shimmered on the water, flickering like small souls. He recalled Bill Chambers' words, "There's something at the bottom," and for a moment, his gaze fixed on the orange buoy drifting lazily in the lake. On the morning of the 5th day, fog still blanketed Round Valley Lake. The air was colder, the wind rippling small waves, carrying the smell of mud and rust. Bill Chambers arrived earliest. The old diver stood on the wooden dock, slinging the oxygen line over his shoulder, staring at the dark water before turning to Lieutenant Marden. "I'm going back to the buoy spot from yesterday. There's something down there, I'm sure." Marden nodded silently. He hadn't slept in 2 nights, his eyes ringed with shadows, stubble patchy. Nearby, reporters from the Hunterdon County Democrat and WNJ-TV were present. Cameras ready. Police set up temporary barriers, hanging signs. "Keep away, investigation area." At 8:20 a.m., Bill submerged, the oxygen line clinking, the lake closing over him with only ripples spreading outward. Below, the water was thick as mud, visibility no more than an arm's length. He followed the guide rope, his flashlight's pale yellow beam catching a metallic glint in the murky darkness. A curve, then 2 round shapes. When he touched it, mud fell away, revealing a faded Buick logo. Bill's heart pounded. He signaled over the radio, "I've got the car." Upside down, about 60 yards from shore. His voice trembled but was firm. On the surface, Marden squinted at the old sonar's screeching display. "Confirm coordinates. Set a second buoy." Other divers prepared cables, and a mobile crane was brought in, its wheels grinding over gravel like tortured metal. When Bill surfaced, he removed his mask, breathing heavily. "The front's buried in mud," he said. "Doors closed, windows intact, no major impact marks. They might still be inside." Marden turned away, gripping his notebook tightly. "Call the salvage team." By noon, a light rain began to fall. A heavy fire department crane arrived, its red body stark against the grim scene. A thick steel chain was lowered, clanking as it hit the water. The crane operator said, "Pull slow. If the doors open, bodies might float out." Marden ordered, "Follow protocol, preserve the scene." Everyone held their breath. As the cable tightened, the water bubbled, then parted in a black streak. The Buick Skylark emerged, coated in mud and algae, water streaming from its seams. Camera flashes flared as reporters crowded behind the barriers. As the car rose above the lake, light glinted off its faded turquoise paint. The doors remained closed. The windshield was cracked in a long line, mud caking the hood. A mechanic pried open the rear door with a cutting tool, white smoke rising as the blade met water. Inside, 2 small figures leaned toward each other. A woman with brown hair, her sweater mud-soaked, still clutching the seatbelt. In the back, a boy, arms wrapped tightly around a teddy bear, his head resting on his mother's shoulder. No one spoke. A young officer collapsed, dry heaving. Bill bowed his head, tears mixing with rain. Marden quietly approached, nodding for the forensics team to document the scene. "Don't touch anything," he said softly. When a leather wallet was found in the front seat, he signaled for it to be handed to him. Inside were a few wet bills, an old photo of Linda and Tommy by the Raritan River, and a scribbled note. "Mom, I'll be back early." The coroner removed a silver necklace from Linda's wrist, its pendant engraved with tiny letters, "Tommy 1972." In that moment, no one could speak. News of the car's discovery spread like wildfire. Within an hour, the lake shore was packed with people. Police set up more barriers, pushing reporters back. They tried to snap photos through long lenses, while Marden shouted, "No pictures, no filming the bodies." But cameras still flashed. A few early editions captured the crane lifting the car, water dripping from its undercarriage like blood. That photo would dominate the Hunterdon County Democrat's front page the next morning, captioned, "Linda Harper's car recovered from Round Valley Reservoir." Evelyn learned the news while sitting in her small Main Street home. She stared at the black and white TV, showing the waterlogged car being pulled up. Her hand shook, the cup in her hand crashing to the floor. She only heard the reporter say the bodies of the mother and son were found inside before collapsing. Neighbors rushed over, calling an ambulance. Amid the distant siren, her eyes remained glued to the screen, where two black body bags were loaded onto stretchers. At the police station, Marden sat alone in a small room. The yellow lamplight illuminated his tired, hollow face. He flipped through crime scene photos, pausing at the image of the silver necklace. His hand trembled, his gaze frozen. Outside, Bill Chambers packed his gear, glancing at him through the glass door, sighing. He knew something about this case wasn't simple. But for Bill, the lake's water was the world's tightest grave, where secrets people wanted hidden could sleep forever. That night, Round Valley Lake returned to silence. The black water reflected the distant glow of the crane's lights. Wind blew through the trees, carrying the smell of metal and cold rain. A few firefighters lingered, cleaning the scene. The clank of chains dragging on the wet road. One asked quietly, "So, it's over?" Bill only replied, "No, the water never gives everything back." Elsewhere, in a cold white hospital room, Evelyn Harper opened her eyes, whispering to the nurse. "They found my girl?" The nurse leaned down, held her hand, and said nothing. The next morning, the local paper hit stands with bold headlines. "Round Valley Tragedy. Mother and son found after 5 days missing." Below the photo of the salvaged car, smaller text read, "Police say this may be an accident due to weather." In the corner, another photo, Evelyn wrapped in a shawl, sitting in a wheelchair outside her home, eyes staring into the distance. No one in town noticed the final detail in the image. Beneath her coat's hem, a small necklace gleamed faintly in the sunlight. Tommy, 1972. Late October in Newark was cold and gray, dried maple leaves piling up at the entrance to the New Jersey State Medical Examiner's office. 2 days after the Buick Skylark was recovered, the bodies of Linda Harper and her son Tommy were brought here, placed in white nylon bags, labeled 77914A and 77914B. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Raymond Keller, a tall, thin man in his 50s, with steel-framed glasses, stood in a brightly lit room smelling of chemicals. He opened the file, reviewed the scene report, and signaled for the technician to prepare. The room was so quiet, you could hear the pencil tapping lightly on the clipboard. "Traffic accident due to weather," Keller said softly to his assistant, as if stating a foregone conclusion. That night's rain, slick roads, old car, poor visibility, could have lost control. He pulled on rubber gloves, leaned down to examine the victim's neck. Linda wore a thick, decayed sweater, the silver necklace placed beside her. "Broken neck, clearly a strong impact," he said, then paused, frowning. "But the angle's odd." He measured the brake's tilt with a small ruler. The fracture slanted to the right, not the usual forward or left tilt from hitting the steering wheel. If it was a head-on crash, the bone should have broken straight forward or to the left, Keller muttered, jotting a few more notes. The front of the car was examined concurrently by the forensic team. No brake marks on the tires, no glass shards inside. A young technician, Charlie Ng, pointed at the windshield placed on the stainless steel table. "Sir, the glass broke from the outside in. Look, the edges curve inward, not outward." Keller paused, looking up. "You sure?" "Positive. I measured it. Something hit hard from the outside, focused force." Keller fell silent, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief, his eyes darkening slightly. Tommy, the 5-year-old, had no clear injuries except a few bruises on his arms. The preliminary report listed the cause of death as drowning. Time of death matched his mother's between 8 o'clock and 8:30 p.m., October 24th. Keller closed the file, the fluorescent light reflecting off his glasses. "Something's not right," he said softly. But no one responded. That afternoon, Lieutenant Frank Marden arrived. His leather jacket still carried the scent of tobacco, his shoes caked with mud he hadn't cleaned. He peered through the glass of the autopsy room, seeing two bodies covered in white sheets, only ID tags hanging from their wrists. Keller stepped out, holding a clipboard. "We've completed the preliminary autopsy," he said. "Cause of death, drowning, cervical fracture, possibly due to a traffic accident," Marden asked. "Anything unusual?" Keller hesitated. "I'm not sure, but there are some details." He almost mentioned the neck fracture angle and the windshield, but stopped when he saw Marden's eyes, cold, deep, and weary. Marden said slowly, "We need a clear conclusion. The press is swarming. The town needs answers." Keller nodded slightly, looking away. "I understand." That evening, in the hospital office, Keller sat writing the report. The dim yellow desk lamp cast light on the paper. He wrote slowly, "Cause of death, drowning, cervical fracture, possible vehicular accident due to weather condition." In the notes section, he started to add, "Frontal impact inconsistent with steering wheel injury," but paused, glancing at the door. Marden stood there, holding a coffee cup. "I'll send this file to the county court tomorrow morning," Marden said, his voice low. "We don't want to cause more pain. The community's already shaken." Keller looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. The next morning, a press conference was held at the Clinton police station. Marden stood before dozens of reporters, a sign behind him reading Round Valley investigation. He spoke clearly, calmly. "Based on autopsy results and scene evidence, the police conclude this was a traffic accident due to poor weather conditions. No signs of foul play." Cameras flashed. A reporter asked, "There are rumors about an unusual neck fracture and windshield damage. Can you confirm?" Marden replied, his face unchanged. "Those are rumors, not consistent with official findings." The conference ended amid the sound of scribbling pens and scraping chairs. Evelyn watched the press conference on a black and white TV in her living room. The screen flickered with static, Marden's image blurring in the snowy display. She turned it off, sitting still, clutching a rosary. "An accident," she muttered. "My daughter didn't lose control. She knew every curve of that road." She opened a drawer, pulling out a framed photo of Linda and Tommy. "No, someone did this to my girl." Her voice trembled, almost a whisper, but each word fell like a small blade. At the police station, Dr. Keller's report was filed in the main case folder, marked for internal use only. Photos detailing the neck and windshield were moved to storage, absent from the press summary. A week later, Keller called Marden. "I think we should revisit the neck fracture. It might be from an impact before the car went into the water." Marden replied coldly, "We've closed this case, doctor. Don't complicate things." The call ended. That night, Keller sat alone in the lab. He looked at the X-ray of the neck bone on the table, the light revealing the fractures clearly, the angle impossible for a self-inflicted crash. He sighed, closed the file, sealed it in an envelope, and locked it in a private drawer. "Some things are better left alone," he said softly. Outside, it rained. Drops tapped steadily on the window, echoing like a countdown to something unspoken. A few days later, the Buick Skylark was towed to the evidence lot and quickly sealed. In the press, the Harper case was relegated to the local accident section, page 7. A few short lines. "Accident due to weather, no suspicion of foul play." Marden was praised as an efficient commander, helping the town overcome a tragic loss. But in the small house on Main Street, Evelyn Harper stayed up late each night, sitting by the window, looking toward Round Valley Lake, where the water reflected the cold moonlight. In her heart, the truth was never silent, just temporarily submerged under the black water. February 1978. Winter in Clinton, closed with a thin layer of snow covering rooftops and the nearly frozen Round Valley Lake. Over 3 months after the accident, case hash 77914. Harper, Linda, and Thomas was transferred from the county police office to the state level with Lieutenant Frank Marden's final note. Accidental drowning, case closed. No grand press conference, no memorial. Everything ended as quietly as the car had sunk into the water that rainy night. Marden received a commendation for swiftly and cleanly handling a case that drew public attention, earning a gold star on his shoulder and thanks from the town council. In a newspaper photo, he shook hands with the mayor outside the police station. A faint smile on his lips, but eyes cold as metal. Below the article, a small line, "Victim's family declined to comment." Evelyn Harper read the article in silence. She cut it out, folded it, and tucked it into an envelope with dozens of letters she'd sent everywhere to state police, the state justice department, any address she thought might listen. In each letter, she repeated one thing: "Please review. My daughter didn't die in an accident." But for months, no response. Envelopes returned with red return to sender stamps. She began writing down every detail she remembered, as if writing long enough would make the truth appear. The sound of rain that night, the fading headlights, Linda's last words. "Mom, I'll be back early." Sometimes, she called the Clinton police station. The familiar, weary receptionist's voice, "Mrs. Harper, the case is resolved. The police have no further information." She replied softly, "It's not that you don't have it, it's that you don't want to look." Then she hung up, hands trembling, tears soaking her notepad. That spring, Round Valley Lake thawed. People returned to fish and boat. No one mentioned the Harper case, except in vague gossip. The general store near the post office even hung Marden's photo, shaking hands with the mayor, next to a sign for fire department volunteers wanted. For them it was over, just a tragic accident in the town's memory. But for Evelyn, every passing night was a reliving of the wind, howling over the lake. In her home, Linda's room remained untouched. A wedding photo hung on the wall, Tommy's old teddy bear sat on the bed. On the table, she kept a Bible open to John 8:32. "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Each time she read it, she whispered, "If you can hear me, help me." One April afternoon, Evelyn brought all her papers, reports, photos, reply letters, to the county police station. The young clerk looked at her with pity. "Mrs. Harper, Lieutenant Marden is in a meeting." Evelyn said, "I just need 5 minutes." 15 minutes later, Marden emerged, his dark leather jacket on, coffee cup in hand. He stood before her, calm. "Mrs. Harper, I know you're grieving, but this case is closed. We found no evidence of a crime." Evelyn stared at him, her voice hoarse. "No evidence, or did you hide it?" Marden paused, then pursed his lips. "Sometimes, accepting the truth is easier, ma'am." He walked away, leaving her in the long hallway, the fluorescent light cold overhead. After that day, Evelyn stopped going to the police station. She began writing a diary, page by page, recording thoughts, feelings, strange dreams. Some nights, she dreamed the lake split open, the car slowly rising, and Linda, stepping out, hair dripping, smiling. "Mom, I'm back." She woke in the dark, cold room, hearing only the clocks tick like dripping water. Fall 1978. Grass grew over the spot on the lake shore where the crane once stood. Fishermen set up folding chairs, casting lines into the calm water. Wind stirred, small waves lapping around buoys. No one remembered exactly where the Buick sank. The county police stored the case in Archive Room 3, in a metal cabinet with a faded label, Case #77914. Closed. Inside was a file less than an inch thick, a brief report, a few scene photos, a condensed autopsy report, no mention of the misaligned neck fracture or the glass broken from the outside. Dr. Keller, the coroner from that year, moved to teaching at Rutgers University. He kept a sealed envelope with a copy of the neck X-ray in his desk drawer. Whenever he opened it for other files, he'd touch the envelope's edge, sighing. He knew he'd let the truth sleep, and each year, that sleep grew heavier. Clinton gradually returned to its quiet rhythm. A new gas station opened, a small supermarket appeared, and kids grew up unaware of the previous year's disappearance. But when rain fell and sirens echoed through the valley, older folks still shivered, recalling another rainy night in 1977 when two headlights vanished into the lake. Evelyn still walked each morning along the water's edge, an old wool scarf around her neck, steps slow and steady. She looked at the calm water, where the gray sky reflected like a misty mirror. In her heart, the waves never stopped. March 2023. New Jersey entered a wet spring, thin rain dusting time over everything, including case files thought forgotten in the state police archives in Trenton. In a basement room, hundreds of old case boxes were stacked to the ceiling, dust thick on faded labels. Each bore a cold stamp, case closed. The Cold Case New Jersey project had just launched after over 2 years of preparation, approved by the state attorney general. Goal: review cases from 1950 to 1990 with investigative irregularities. The first list included over 400 cases, among them, at number 17, Harper, Linda and Thomas, 1977. Investigator Clara Ruiz, 35, was among those chosen for the project. With 10 years in Newark's Field Investigation Unit, she was known for being meticulous and tough. Puerto Rican, raised in Jersey City's working-class area, Clara understood the feeling of being overlooked by the system. When her supervisor assigned the case, he slid a brown folder toward her. Harper case. Mother and son drowned in 1977, ruled an accident. But the file has oddities. Closed in just 3 weeks. No witness statements. Clara flipped through the yellowed pages, smelling dampness and old ink. The first page read case hash 77914. Closed, accidental drowning. Photos showed the Buick Skylark, pulled from the lake, a silver necklace hanging on the hood, light faintly reflecting on the water. 3 weeks for a double fatality, she said softly. Her voice a mix of surprise and skepticism. That evening, as the office emptied, Clara stayed. She turned on the desk lamp, spreading out the reports. Dr. Raymond Keller's autopsy report was typed, but the signature at the bottom was in blue ink, different from the text above. She tilted the paper under the light, seeing shaky handwriting, ink smudged as if rewritten. Below the signature, a small note, filed by Lieutenant Frank Marden, Clinton PD. Clara frowned, tapping her pen on the desk. Marden, Clinton's police chief in 1977. She jotted in the margin, possible file tampering. The next morning, Clara visited the old evidence archive. The keeper, an elderly man named Howard, looked at her through foggy round glasses. Harper? Yeah, it's still here. Small box, number 77, 914, untouched since then. He pulled open a creaking steel door, the smell of rust and damp paper spilling out. Clara put on gloves, opened the box. Inside were simple items: a strand of hair in an old plastic bag, a small piece of glass, a crumpled map, and an envelope labeled "Personal Effects." Harper. She carefully opened it, seeing the tarnished silver necklace engraved with Tommy 1972, and a plastic-sealed wet note. Mom, I'll be back early. Clara sat for a long time, her heart heavy. Each item felt like a trapped cry for help across decades. She reopened the hair bag, the light catching the nearly transparent strand. The label read, "Only unknown male hair recovered from driver's seat belt. No DNA, no analysis." In 1977, they couldn't test genes, but in 2023, things were different. Clara immediately emailed the state's Central Forensics Lab, requesting DNA testing on the remaining sample. As she left the archive, the sun had set. In the long hallway, neon lights reflected on cold white tiles, each step echoing like a voice from the past. She paused before the cold case division. Authorized personnel only sign, looking at the dull brass plaque, then whispered, "If they buried the truth, I'll dig it up." That night, in her small Trenton apartment, Clara opened her laptop, researching those involved in the Harper case. She found a 1978 article, "Lieutenant Frank Marden commended for swiftly resolving Round Valley accident." Below was a photo of him in uniform, shaking hands with Clinton's mayor. Beside him stood Dr. Keller, the coroner who signed the autopsy report. Everything looked too perfect, too clean. Clara zoomed in on the photo, focusing on Marden's eyes, cold and evasive. She opened her notes, typing, "Motive for cover-up? Personal connection to victim?" The next morning, preliminary DNA results arrived in her inbox. The text made her pause. "Male DNA detected, not belonging to victim or child. Sample sufficient for comparison." Clara sat up, heart racing. Not Linda's husband, not the child. Then who? She called her supervisor, Lieutenant Colonel Morris, presenting the findings. He listened, nodded, then cautioned. "Remember, Ruiz, this is a sensitive case. Marden was a respected figure in the force. He's long retired, has friends everywhere. Be careful," Clara replied curtly. "I'm not afraid of his name. I'm afraid of justice being forgotten again." That afternoon, she returned to her desk, looking at the stack of yellowed files. In the quiet room, the wall clock ticked steadily. She touched the Harper file, feeling as if she were touching the skin of the past. A chill ran down her spine. In the file's corner, the typed closed 1978 faded, but the blue handwritten F. Marden remained vivid. Clara picked up a ballpoint pen, drew a line through closed, and wrote over it in firm, neat strokes. Reopened. March 12, 2023. In that moment, a sound came from outside, a distant spring thunderclap. She looked up at the window. Trenton was raining again, drops sliding down the glass like streaks of memory dissolving. A lightning flash illuminated Clara's face, calm, cold, and resolute. "I want to review all the evidence," she said softly, like a promise to two souls silenced for 46 years. The evidence archive of the state police in Trenton sat deep in the basement where fluorescent lights reflected off peeling white walls. The temperature stayed at 10 degrees Celsius, cold enough to preserve tens of thousands of old case artifacts, things time seemed to erase but merely left dormant in silence. Clara Ruiz, gloved, reopened the evidence box. Labeled Case #77914, Harper, Linda and Thomas. The lid popped open with a soft creak, releasing a mix of damp paper, metal and old dust, sharp as the scent of memory. Inside, everything remained as it was sealed, nearly half a century ago. A plastic bag with a light-colored hair labeled "Unknown Male Hair Driver's Seatbelt," a tarnished silver necklace engraved Tommy 1972. An envelope of blurry crime scene photos, a few mud-covered windshield shards, and an old cloth bag holding a leather wallet. She looked at each item, feeling as if she were touching time, each a fragment from that rainy 1977 night. Clara gently lifted the hair, examining it under a handheld magnifier. The strand was thick, light gray, about 2 inches long, its root broken, no scalp tissue attached. "Not a woman's," she murmured. In 1977, they could only note color and location, but in 2023, a single hair could hold a person's genetic profile. She resealed it, assigned a new code, signed for it, and sent it to the DNA lab. 2 weeks later, results arrived in a white envelope marked Forensic Division, Confidential. Clara tore open the seal, reading the bold text, "DNA male profile extracted successfully. Not matching victims. Not matching child's paternal line. No match found in federal database." She paused at the last line. "Sample sufficient for potential comparison with known suspects." Leaning back in her chair, she stared at the cold-lit ceiling. That DNA, a man unrelated, present in Linda Harper's car just before it sank. Not her husband, who died in a 1975 construction accident. Not her son, nor a relative. Then who? Clara opened the old file, scanning the list of those involved in the 1977 investigation. Typed on a typewriter, it listed 17 names, local police, firefighters, and scene technicians. She crossed them off, noting 5 deceased, 8 retired, 4 still alive. And in that list on the second line was Lieutenant Frank Marden, Clinton PD. She stared at the name for a long time. She'd heard it in the old files, The man who led the investigation closed the case in 3 weeks, praised for swift resolution. She tapped her finger on the desk, the sound echoing coldly in the empty room. Who was he really, in this case? That afternoon, Clara took the DNA results to the comparison lab. She requested a trace through the internal database, holding biological samples from state and local police, including those who served before 1980. The lab tech, an older woman named Lydia, looked at her, pursing her lips. "Who do you want me to compare it to?" Clara replied. The list of those at the scene in 1977, prioritizing Frank Marden. Lydia raised an eyebrow. "He's a legend in the force, you know." "I know," Clara said evenly. "And I know every legend has a shadow." The comparison system took nearly 3 hours. Clara sat in the hallway, hearing the scanners hum, the steady tapping of keyboards, a taut string in her chest waiting to snap. When Lydia emerged, holding a printout, her face was grave. "Can't conclude definitively because the sample's old, but high similarity." Clara took the paper, her eyes locking on the center line, partial DNA match. Subject Frank Marden, retired Clinton PD. She sat still, the room feeling colder by degrees. Part of her had suspected, but seeing his name on paper made the truth tighten her chest. The man hailed as the case's hero was the only trace left in the victim's car. That evening, Clara sat alone at a small diner on Front Street with a cold coffee. Outside it rained, a thin cold rain like the night Linda Harper vanished. She opened her laptop, starting an internal report. DNA evidence confirms the presence of an unrelated male in the victim's car before the accident. The entire 1977 timeline and personnel, particularly Lieutenant Frank Marden, lead investigator and final signatory on the case closure, must be reinvestigated. She stopped typing, looking out the fogged window. A group of teens laughed under yellow streetlights, unaware a woman died here 46 years ago, and her possible killer lived peacefully all those years. She closed the laptop, pulled out her phone, and called her supervisor. "I need the 1977 Clinton PD personnel list, everyone involved in the Harper case, and I want access to Marden's retirement records." The other end was silent for a few seconds before asking, "You think he's involved?" Clara replied slowly, each word deliberate. "I don't think, I know he hid something. And I'll find it." That night, back at her apartment, she spread out a Clinton map on the table. A red pin marked Round Valley Lake, another the old police station where Marden worked. Between them, a penciled line, Pleasant Run Road. The route Linda took the night she vanished. Clara took a red marker, circled Frank Marden's name, and wrote beside it, "Start here." Outside, thunder rumbled. Rain fell steady and cold, like the pulse of an old case waking after 46 years. Clara drove out of Trenton on a cloudy April morning, Interstate 78, stretching through misty fields and bare trees. She'd tracked down Margaret Klein, Linda Harper's best friend in 1977, now living in Flemington, about 15 miles from Round Valley Lake. She parked in front of a small white wooden house with a low sloped roof, its garden full of wilted lavender pots. A small brass sign on the door read, "No solicitors." Clara rang the bell, and moments later, a woman in her 60s with sparse silver hair opened the door. "You are." Margaret squinted through reading glasses. "Clara Ruiz, State Police investigator. I'm here about Linda Harper." The name made the woman freeze. She gripped the door's edge, her voice trembling. "After all these years, someone still remembers her?" Clara nodded. "The case is reopened. I just want to hear what you recall." They sat in a dated living room, walls lined with family photos. Morning light filtered through curtains, casting a pale yellow glow on the wooden table. Margaret poured tea, her hands slightly shaking. "Linda and I worked at the bank in Flemington. She was kind, loved her son. But the last few months before she died, she'd changed, always tense, staring out windows." She paused, sipping tea. "Once, she told me, Frank Marden keeps coming to my house, bringing beer, talking work. But I know it's not just that. I asked if something was going on between them, and she shook her head, said, "He told me not to tell anyone about us." Clara wrote down every word. "Did you think they were romantically involved?" Margaret sighed. "I don't know." Linda never said outright, but I remember she was scared of him. Once she said, "If I speak out, he'll ruin me." Then she cried. She looked up, her eyes heavy with sadness. After that, I never saw her again. Then heard she died. Police said accident, but I knew Linda drove carefully. She'd never speed on that road. Clara asked, "Did you ever report Marden visiting her?" Margaret gave a bitter laugh. "I did. I told a young officer, Lyle, that Marden kept seeing Linda. He wrote it down, said he'd submit it. But when the press released the case details, my statement was gone. Like I never said it." Her words sent a chill down Clara's spine. Margaret stood, pulled a yellow envelope from an old drawer, and took out a faded Polaroid. In it, Linda and Margaret sat in a yard, a wooden fence behind them. A man stood in the distance, blurred by reflected light. That day Frank came by. "I snapped this by accident. Look, it's him." Clara took the photo, her heart pounding. Though blurry, she recognized the tall, broad-shouldered figure. "The distinctive police hat," she said softly. "Thank you, I'll keep this safe." As Clara left, a light rain began. In the rearview mirror, Margaret stood at the door, clutching the curtain, her eyes distant. Clara knew the memory of 46 years lingered, inescapable. That afternoon, Clara drove to an old gas station on Route 31 2 miles from Round Valley, the workplace of a new witness she'd tracked down. Harold Bennett, now over 70, still tended the station run by his son. When she asked about the rainy October night in 1977, he gave an awkward smile, thought no one remembered that. "Tell me what you saw that night," Clara said, opening her notebook. Harold wiped his hands on an oily rag. "That evening, I was on night shift. Around 8, it was pouring. I heard a car slow down, looked out, and saw a light-colored Buick pass by. I remember 'cause the taillights were dim. Right after, a police car followed, a white Plymouth with Clinton County plates. I thought they were escorting each other, but minutes later, I only saw the patrol car's lights stop by the roadside, right at the lake's curve." He paused, looking at Clara. "That was the last I saw of those lights. Next morning, I heard Miss Harper drowned." Clara asked, "Did you report that to the police during the investigation?" Harold nodded. "Sure did. I told a lieutenant, none other than Marden himself." He listened, then said, "You must be mistaken. There was no patrol car in that area that night. Told me not to spread baseless stories." He gave a short, tired laugh. "I kept quiet for 46 years. But since you're asking, yeah, I'm certain it was a police car. I served in the fire brigade. I know the way those patrol lights flash, different from regular ones." Clara closed her notebook, her heart heavy. Two testimonies, Margaret's and Harold's, both pointed to one man, Frank Marden, a man once celebrated as the town's symbol of justice. She sat in her car, watching the rain streak across the windshield, feeling like scattered puzzle pieces were starting to fit together, forming the shape of something darker than mere guilt, deliberate concealment. That night, back in Trenton, Clara printed all the documents, pinning Margaret's Polaroid next to the DNA report. She connected them with red string on her investigation board. Margaret Klein's statement erased. Harold Bennett police car cited. Male DNA, matches Marden. Everything converged on a single focal point, Frank Marden. On a late April afternoon, rain pattered steadily on the tin roof of a small wooden house on Clinton's outskirts. Evelyn Harper, now 89, sat in an old armchair by the window, a wool blanket draped over her knees. When Clara Ruiz arrived, it took Evelyn a few seconds to recognize the young woman in a leather jacket, a police badge around her neck. "I knew you'd come," Evelyn said softly, her voice quivering with age, but her eyes strikingly bright. "You've finally reopened my girl's case." Clara nodded, pulling a chair to sit across from her. In the low-ceilinged room, the smell of old wood and candles mingled. On the table beside the chair was a small tarnished tin box. Evelyn pointed to it. "What you're looking for is in there." Linda's diary. Clara opened the box, revealing a green leather-bound notebook, its corners worn and water-stained. The first page was written in fountain pen. Linda Harper started writing again, August 1977. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, and steady, filled with mundane details. Work, the joy of Tommy learning to read, the smell of her mother's apple pie. But as Clara turned the pages, the writing grew hurried, scrawled, with smudged ink, as if written in fear. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached the final page. The paper was yellowed, but the words were clear. Asterisk, October 23, 1977. Frank told me not to go to the police, said he'd ruin my career. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. He was drinking beer, said he just wanted to help, but his eyes weren't those of a helper. I can't trust him anymore. If something happens to me, Mom will know who did it. Clara sat motionless for a long time. In the quiet room, only the steady tick of a clock and the patter of rain on the porch broke the silence. She read it a second time, then a third. Each word carved itself into her mind, sending a chill down her spine. Frank, the name stood out like an accusation buried for nearly half a century. Evelyn looked at her, her aged eyes welling with tears. I've read that page 100 times, she said. I took it to the police in 1978, but they sent it back, said it had no legal value without witnesses. I've kept it ever since. See, the ink there is different from the earlier pages. It's shaky and darker. Linda only wrote like that when she was terrified. Clara nodded, placing the notebook on the table. The window's light illuminated the trembling script, highlighting each abrupt pause in the pen strokes. She wrote this the day before she died, Clara said softly. Evelyn responded with a long sigh. I know. The next day she left and never came back. The police said it was an accident. I knew she met him. Clara looked at her, seeing in those eyes 46 years of waiting and doubt. Did you ever see Marden after that? She asked. Evelyn nodded. A week after the funeral, he came here, brought flowers, offered condolences. I remember clearly. He looked around the house, then said, "She shouldn't have gone out that night." I asked him, "How do you know she went out that night?" He went quiet, then left. She turned to the window, where rain still fell. You know, for all these years, I waited for someone to ask me about that diary. No one did. They all believed him. Clara carefully placed the notebook in an evidence bag, labeling it. It won't stay silent anymore, I promise. Evelyn gave a weary smile. Don't promise me, promise Linda. On the drive back to Trenton, Clara drove in silence. Wind whipped cold rain against the windshield. She placed the notebook on the passenger seat, glancing at it as if it were a living witness. Each time an oncoming car's headlights flashed, Linda's slanted words flickered in her mind, as if Linda were whispering through each letter, I'm scared. That evening, in her office, Clara opened the notebook again. She read every page, from the happy early days to the lines that turned into confessions. In mid-September, Linda wrote, Frank said he'd help get my brother a job. I don't want to see him anymore. He comes to the house unannounced. On another page, Tommy doesn't like him. He said, Mom, I'm scared of Uncle Frank. Those brief lines chilled Clara. She reopened the case file, piecing together the evidence, a personal relationship, threats, matching DNA, and now a diary naming him explicitly. Everything fit perfectly, too perfectly, to call it an accident. Clara stood, looking out the pitch-black window. Trenton city lights glowed, their yellow streaks reflecting on the glass, much like Round Valley Lake in old photos. She took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and called her supervisor. Lieutenant Colonel Morris, I found Linda Harper's diary. She wrote clearly about being threatened by Frank Marden before her death. This isn't suspicion anymore, it's evidence. The line was silent for a moment. Then Morris's hoarse voice came through. You sure, Ruiz? If this is true, it'll shake the whole state. Clara looked at the open notebook on her desk, the final line still vivid, the ink smudged, but the meaning intact. I'm sure, now I understand why he had to close the case so fast. She closed the notebook, carefully placing it in an evidence bag. Outside, rain fell, steady and cold, like a distant soundtrack to the final confession of a woman who died, a woman who, for 46 years, had whispered from the lake's depths, "I'm scared." The final forensic report arrived at Clara's office on an early May morning, stamped with the red seal of the New Jersey State Forensic Division. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the envelope, the smell of fresh paper and ink mixing with the stale coffee on her desk. The report was a mere 5 pages, but a line on the third page hit her like a jolt. Full DNA match. Sample 77914 A_hair_1, consistent with genetic profile of Franklin J. Marden, male, 81, retired police officer, residing at Bridgewater Care Home. Clara sat still, staring at the paper. In her mind, the case's fragmented images, Linda's diary, Margaret's testimony, the gas station witness, the car in the lake, connected into a single clear line. No more doubts or theories. Marden was in Linda's car the night she died, and if he was there, he had lied for 46 years. She printed 2 copies, signed them, and compiled them with supporting evidence, diary copies, the Polaroid, witness statements, into a file nearly 2 inches thick. When she walked to Lieutenant Colonel Morris's office, his door was ajar. He stood by the window, looking at the sunlit parking lot. "Ruiz," he said, as she knocked lightly. "Any news from the DNA lab?" She placed the file on his desk. "This is the news." Morris flipped open the first page, skimmed, then stopped at the final confirmation. He looked up, his eyes heavy. "Good Lord, it's really him." "Yes," Clara said, her voice low. "The hair on the driver's seatbelt matches Marden completely. Not a coincidence. And Linda's diary clearly states he threatened her before her death." Morris sat down, rubbing his forehead. "You know who this will touch?" Marden was a legend in Clinton PD. Medals, friends everywhere in the force. "This case will make a lot of people lose face," Clara replied. Her voice even but firm. "I don't work to save face for the department, Lieutenant Colonel. I work to find justice for the dead." That afternoon, she submitted the file officially to the state prosecutor's office in Newark, with a request for an arrest warrant and a case retrial. The receiving clerk, a gray-haired official, read the suspect's name and looked at Clara in disbelief. "Frank Marden, you sure you want to stir this hornet's nest?" Clara said only. "If that nest holds a viper, it deserves to be opened." While awaiting warrant approval, Clara drove to Bridgewater, where Frank Marden lived in a private care home. The facility sat on a quiet hill, lined with old oak trees, just over 20 miles from Round Valley. She carried no badge or warrant, just wanted to observe. In the hallway, elderly residents watched TV or dozed. The desk attendant said, "Mr. Marden's in room 212, end of the right hall. He's quiet, in decent health." Clara walked by, peering through the frosted glass. An old man with silver hair, still tall, sat in a wheelchair, reading an old newspaper. On his table, beside a water glass, was a small photo of him in uniform, younger days. His eyes in the photo were bright, proud, but now, on his real face, only a shadow remained of a man who once thought himself untouchable. Clara stood still, a chill running down her spine. A nurse asked, "You know him?" "No," Clara replied, "but I know what he did." 2 days later, the state prosecutor's office signed the arrest warrant. When the news reached Hunterdon County Police, an uproar erupted. A group of retired officers sent an open letter protesting the smearing of a department icon. Clinton PD's current chief called Clara directly. "You sure you're doing the right thing? He saved lives. Don't disgrace the whole force." Clara calmly replied, "If he saved lives, that's good. But if he took lives, nothing erases that. Justice has no age, and neither does guilt." An emergency meeting was held at state headquarters. Legal reps, prosecutors, county police, and media relations were present. The air was thick. An old officer, a friend of Marden's, slammed the table. He's 81, living in a care home. What's the point of arresting him now? To shame a man near death? Clara looked straight at him. It's not about shaming, it's about saying that even if he lives one more day, Linda Harper never could. Truth doesn't care about age. The room fell silent. Moments later, the chief prosecutor spoke. We proceed by the book. No one is above the law. That afternoon, when the warrant was signed, Clara stepped into the hallway, looking through a window. Sunlight slanted through, illuminating the thick file in her arms. She remembered Evelyn's words when handing over the diary, "Don't promise me, promise Linda." And now, she was keeping that promise. That night, back at her apartment, she opened the file one last time before the operation. Margaret's faded Polaroid lay beside the DNA results. The Tommy 1972 necklace still in its evidence bag. All these, after 46 years, had found a voice. Clara turned on the desk lamp, writing a summary report for the state prosecutor, ending with a single line, sufficient evidence to charge Frank Marden with first-degree murder. As she typed the final period, the clock struck midnight. Outside, early summer rain fell, pattering steadily on the roof, like the slow applause of souls witnessing justice returning. Clara looked out the window, where streetlights reflected on the glass, framing her young but resolute face. Tomorrow morning, she said softly, we wake the past. 6 a.m., Tuesday, May 9, 2023. Bridgewater was cloaked in cold fog. The oak trees outside St. Augustine Care Home swaying lightly in the wind. The front yard was quiet as usual, except today. 5 police cars were parked silently in the shadows, lights off, engines idling softly. Inside, the state police task force awaited the signal. Clara Ruiz sat in the front seat, holding an arrest warrant bearing the New Jersey State Court seal. The sun hadn't risen, pale blue light seeping through the window, highlighting the tension on her face. Over the internal radio, the commander's voice crackled. Target, Frank Marden, 81. Room 212. Approach safely. No reason given until outside public areas. A chorus of Roger responded. The team split into 2 groups. Clara stepped out, her black shoes crunching on the dew-soaked gravel, each step a steady heartbeat. She adjusted her jacket, taking a deep breath. After nearly half a century, justice was finally opening its eyes. Inside the facility, morning shift staff had just changed, confused as police flooded the hallway. A nurse started to ask but was silenced by the lead officer's raised hand. Heavy boots echoed on the tiles, flashlight beams sweeping along the walls, catching framed landscape photos. Room 212 was at the end of the right hall. An officer knocked 3 times, loud and firm, New Jersey State Police. Mr. Frank Marden, we have a warrant for your arrest. No response. They waited 5 seconds, then pushed the door open. Frank Marden sat in a wheelchair, facing the window, a newspaper from that morning on his table. As the door swung open, he turned. His eyes showed no surprise, only narrowing slightly, cold and eerily alert. Clara stepped in first, her voice resolute. Franklin J. Marden, you are under arrest for first-degree murder in the case of Linda and Thomas Harper, 1977, Clinton, New Jersey. Marden looked at her, a faint smirk curling his lips. You're too young to understand justice, he said, his voice raspy with age. Clara replied, unflinching. Justice has no age, sir. She signaled 2 officers to cuff him. The cold click of metal echoed in the dimly lit room, clashing with a heavy past. An officer read his Miranda rights as Marden sat still, giving a faint chuckle. You really think you're arresting a killer? I was called a hero. Clara met his gaze. No one's a hero with blood on their hands. As they led him out, the first camera flash lit the hallway. Local reporters, tipped off, crowded the entrance, microphones raised, shouting, Mr. Marden, did you kill Linda Harper? Why did you stay silent for 46 years? Any words for the victim's family? Police quickly formed a barrier, pushing the crowd back. Clara walked close behind, shielding half her face with her cap. Marden turned, flashing a tired smile at the cameras, the smile of a man who once thought himself untouchable. As the suspect's car left the facility, the media storm erupted. Within hours, online news and TV channels ran breaking stories. Former police lieutenant arrested in 1977 murder case. Round Valley cold case, hero turned suspect. DNA forensics uncover 46-year secret. By noon, national outlets like CNN and NBC picked up the story. Images of Marden, handcuffed, head bowed, flanked by two young officers, flooded screens. Many in New Jersey couldn't believe their eyes. To them, Frank Marden was an icon. The man who led the rescue in a 1981 factory fire, recipient of the state's Bravery Medal. Hundreds of social media comments poured in. "No way, he saved my dad. If this is true, who can we trust?" In Clinton, the small town from years ago, residents gathered outside the Main Street diner. Everyone talked about one thing: they arrested Marden. The elderly diner owner shook her head. "I served him coffee every morning, always polite, called me madam. Thinking about it now gives me chills." A middle-aged man added, "He taught me to drive a patrol car when I was an intern." If this is true, this whole town's been living a lie. The interrogation room on the third floor of Trenton State Police Headquarters that morning was so cold, Clara's breath fogged faintly. Fluorescent bulbs hung low, casting harsh white light on the metal table, where two cold coffee cups gave off a bitter smell. Frank Marden sat across, hands cuffed in front, his aged face still defiant. He wore a gray sweater issued by the care home, its collar slightly crumpled, his pale gray eyes hidden under silver brows, looking like a man who still believed he controlled the room. Clara sat opposite, the thick file between them, labeled Case Hash 77914. Harper, Linda, and Thomas. "You've been read your rights," she began, voice calm. "I'm giving you a chance to explain, your last one." Marden didn't look at her. He leaned back, staring at the one-way mirror. "You don't know," he said slowly. "In 1977, I was the only one in Clinton who dared go out in the rain, searching for that mother and son. The whole town owes me." Clara opened the file, pulling out 3 photos: the Buick Skylark pulled from the lake, the Tommy 1972 necklace, and the Polaroid of Linda with Margaret, with Marden's shadow in the background. She placed each before him, her voice steady. "You owe them more." He glanced at them, his face expressionless. "I didn't kill anyone," he said softly, voice raspy, but his eyes darted away. Clara leaned forward, gentle but firm. "You were in Linda's car. Your DNA was on the driver's seatbelt. What do you say to that?" A heavy silence fell. Only the clock's dry ticks broke it. Then Marden chuckled, a weak, chilling laugh. "DNA, huh? Science is something else now. Back then, a word was enough, and people believed you." He lifted his cuffed wrists, metal clinking. "I just wanted to talk to her that night. We had a misunderstanding." Clara didn't blink. A misunderstanding between a police officer and a young woman who accused you of harassment? Marden's hands tightened. "There was no accusation. Linda was reasonable. She knew I just wanted to help. But then she started threatening. Said she'd tell my wife, my superiors. I couldn't let that ruin my career." Clara flipped to another page, pulling out a photocopy of the diary. Her voice even, October 23, 1977. Linda wrote, "Frank told me not to go to the police, said he'd ruin my career. I'm scared. Want to read it again?" Marden stared at the paper, his eyes locking on the word Frank, lips pursed. After a few seconds he spoke, almost whispering, "I just wanted her to stay quiet. I didn't mean to kill." The room was dead silent. Clara set her pen down. "You didn't mean to kill," she repeated. "But she and her son died in that car. So what do you call that?" Marden took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "I followed her to the lake to talk. She panicked, screamed, said she'd report everything. I tried to hold her back. We struggled. I don't know, I just remember the sound of metal, the boy crying in the car. He paused, voice choking. Then silence. When I looked, she wasn't moving. Clara gripped her pen tightly, but kept her voice calm. And what did you do next? He turned away, eyes on his hands, knuckles prominent. I thought, if I reported it, everything would be over. I'd lose it all. I pulled her into the car, the boy still crying. Then I drove to the lake's curve. It was pouring. I stopped, looked at the water. I don't remember clearly. Just that when the car started sliding down the slope, I jumped out. I left them. Clara felt the air thicken, as if the room were closing in around them. You let them drown, she said slowly, each word deliberate, to save your career. He didn't answer. His face crumpled, hands shaking violently. I didn't want to kill the boy. God, I didn't want to. A rare tear rolled down his cheek, glinting in the light. I just wanted her to stay quiet. I couldn't let her go with that other guy. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes darkening. Other guy? Marden nodded slightly, voice hoarse. Some guy from another bank. I saw them talking, saw the way she looked at him. She forgot me. Forgot who helped her, who protected her. Clara's voice turned icy. And so you killed her. He choked, then looked up at her. I didn't kill, I just let it happen. A long silence followed. Only the air conditioner's steady hum filling the void. Clara stood, gathering the photos, diary, and forensic report. You know, she said, voice low and steady. Linda Harper believed if she died, her mother would know who did it, and she was right. Marden watched her, his eyes sunken. You think arresting me will bring her back? She's still dead. I've only got a few years left. What do you get from late justice? Clara paused at the door, turning back, her gaze cold and sharp as a blade. It's not about bringing anyone back. It's about making sure no one thinks they can bury the truth underwater and it won't resurface. As she stepped out, Lieutenant Colonel Morris was waiting, his face heavy. He confessed? Clara nodded slightly. Partially, enough for the court to see motive, enough for Linda to rest. Behind the metal door, Marden remained, head bowed, hands clenched. He whispered something indistinct, perhaps a prayer or a late regret. Outside, Trenton's sky was overcast, rain falling lightly. A lightning flash gleamed through the window, reflecting on the one-way mirror. For a moment, the image of a man once called a hero flickered, then faded, like the years he tried to hide. March 2024, winter in New Jersey lingered, the wind still biting as it swept across the stone steps of the state Supreme Court in Trenton. On the first morning of the trial, hundreds gathered outside, crowding behind iron barriers. Police set up press tents along the entrance. Under a gloomy sky, signs lined both sides. Justice for Linda, respect our police. DNA has no mercy. The click of cameras, hum of microphones, and murmurs of discussion blended into a small storm. Inside the courtroom, the air was suffocatingly heavy. The jury, 8 men, 4 women, all stared at the man at the defendant's table. Frank Marden, 81, silver-haired, in a gray suit, hands trembling slightly. Across the room, Clara Ruiz sat beside the state prosecutor, her face stoic, a thick file neatly stacked before her. At the back of the public gallery, Evelyn Harper, 89, was wheeled in. Seeing Marden, she turned her head slightly, lips pursed. No one in the room spoke. Judge Arthur Cole, with a deep, decisive voice, struck his gavel to open the session. The trial of the state of New Jersey versus defendant Frank Marden, charged with first-degree murder in the deaths of Linda Harper and her son Thomas Harper in 1977. Now officially begins. Prosecutor Rebecca Lane, a middle-aged black woman, stepped forward. Her voice rang clear, no microphone needed. Your Honor, 46 years ago, a young woman and her 5-year-old son drowned in Round Valley Lake. The lead investigator then, the defendant, Frank Marden, declared it an accident. But today, science, Evidence and conscience will prove it was no accident, but a crime concealed. Rebecca opened her briefcase, pulling out 3 large photos for the projector, the Buick Skylark pulled from the water, the silver Tommy 1972 necklace, and an image of a hair under a microscope. "This is DNA evidence," she said, "recovered from the driver's seatbelt. It matches the defendant Frank Marden's DNA perfectly, and this," she held up a photocopied page, "is the final entry in Linda Harper's diary, dated October 23, 1977. Frank told me not to go to the police. I'm scared." In that moment, the room fell dead, silent. Evelyn raised a hand to her mouth, tears spilling. At the defendant's table, Marden looked down, his shoulders trembling faintly. Clara was called to the witness stand. She stepped up, posture straight, voice steady but low. She recounted reopening the case from the Trenton evidence vault, the hair, witness testimonies, to the diary's discovery. "I wasn't chasing an old man," she said. "I was chasing a truth buried." When the prosecutor asked, "What convinced you this wasn't an accident?" Clara replied, "Because the case was closed in just 3 weeks, and the coroner's signature was inked over. When people fear the light, they have something to hide." Marden's defense attorney objected, claiming Clara was obsessed with playing hero. But the judge struck his gavel. No one becomes a hero by simply telling the truth. The most shocking moment came on the trial's 4th day, when the prosecution called Dr. Raymond Keller, the 1977 coroner now retired. He hobbled to the stand with a cane, the light catching his aged but resolute face. His voice trembled slightly. "I performed the autopsies on Linda Harper and her son. The official 1977 report listed the cause of death as traffic accident due to weather. But that wasn't my original conclusion," the courtroom gasped. The judge banged his gavel for order. Rebecca approached, her voice soft. "Mr. Keller, please clarify." Keller took a deep breath, his eyes moist. "In my first draft I wrote, neck fracture angled right. Inconsistent with steering wheel impact, windshield broken from the outside. But when I submitted it, Lieutenant Marden came to me, asking me to revise it. He said, 'If you don't, the whole town will lose faith in the police.' Wordingdo revised it. I've lived with that guilt for 46 years. A heavy silence blanketed the room. Rebecca said nothing. The judge lowered his head, then said slowly, "The court acknowledges the testimony." In the public gallery, Evelyn sobbed, tears falling onto her hands. A reporter in the back row captured the moment. A photo later featured on the New York Times front page, with the caption, "Victim's mother hears the truth," after nearly half a century. That afternoon, Marden was allowed to speak. He stood shakily, hands trembling on the table. "I don't deny I went to see Linda," he said, his voice hoarse and halting. "I loved her, but I lost control. I thought I could keep her, protect her from trouble. I didn't want her to die." His voice broke. "I remember the boy crying. I can't forget it." A juror bowed their head, wiping tears. Rebecca didn't look at him, only said, "You protected her by drowning her?" Marden didn't answer, just lowered his head. A tear fell onto the wooden table, breaking silently like the last memory of a man who lived a life of lies. When the court recessed, the media exploded. Marden breaks down seeing victim's photo, admits losing control. Outside, the crowd grew, half held signs reading "Justice for Linda." The other half stood silent, their eyes vacant, as if their past was crumbling. On the final day, Evelyn was called to testify at the prosecution's request. Her voice was frail but clear. "I'm not here to hate. I'm here to say my daughter didn't die in vain. Any mother can forgive, but none can forget." She looked at Marden, her eyes clear despite her age. "I hope you remember her not as a mistake, but as the person you took away." The courtroom was so silent, you could hear breathing. Marden bowed his head, his hands shaking violently. For the first time, he said nothing. When the judge declared the examination phase closed, no one stood immediately. Everyone sat as if witnessing the most tragic play of justice, where the criminal was once celebrated, and the seeker of justice had only months left to live. Outside the courthouse, Trenton's air was still. Reporters jostled for footage as Clara emerged with Evelyn. The older woman grasped her hand, smiling weakly. "Thank you, Clara," she said softly. "Now my daughter can rest." Clara bowed her head, eyes misty. On the courthouse steps, the wind scattered old newspapers bearing Marden's younger image. One stopped at Clara's feet, its faded headline, "Hero Saves Town from Fire." She picked it up, glanced at it, then folded it. "Justice doesn't erase the past," she whispered, "but it can make the past answer." In the deep red sunset over the city, the courthouse bell rang 3 long tolls. On the horizon, the day's last light reflected off the copper dome, a light both cold and warm, like justice finally arrived. Late, but never lost. 8 days after the examination phase ended, Courtroom 3 of the New Jersey State Supreme Court was packed again. March winds outside remained cold, rows of people waiting silently at the gate since early morning. Live broadcasts set up cameras on the steps, every lens focused on a single door, where the jury would emerge. Inside, the air was thick, as if the room held its breath. Frank Marden sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped, silver cuffs glinting under the light. He was visibly thinner since his arrest, cheeks sunken, eyes cloudy staring at the floor. Across, Clara Ruiz sat beside the prosecutor, silent, watching. In the front row, Evelyn Harper was wheeled in, a wool scarf around her neck. On her lap, the Tommy 1972 necklace gleamed under the white light. When the rear door opened, the room stood. The jury, 4-person, a middle-aged woman, held a folded paper. Her voice trembled, but was clear. "In the case of the state of New Jersey versus defendant Frank Marden, we, the jury, after considering all evidence and testimony, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree." The room's sound seemed to vanish. Then, a collective exhale, a few soft sobs breaking through. Evelyn raised a hand to her mouth, tears streaming silently. Clara lowered her head, eyes closing for a moment, as if steadying herself. At the defendant's table, Marden sat motionless. Light from the window illuminated half his face, old, cold, and empty. Judge Arthur Cole struck his gavel 3 times, his voice heavy but firm. "Defendant Frank Marden, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without parole. The court recognizes this case involves severe abuse of power and a 46-year cover-up. This sentence cannot restore the victims' lives, but it can restore justice's dignity." As 2 officers approached, Marden remained still. Then, slowly, he looked up at Clara, his gaze a mix of exhaustion and something unnameable. He said softly, "Just for her. She loved me once." Clara met his eyes, not angry, only replying quietly, "No, she trusted you once." A brief silence followed, then the officers lifted him. The faint clink of cuffs echoed far, spreading through the room. As he passed the public gallery, some wept, some turned away. A few retired officers bowed their heads. At the row's end, Evelyn watched, her lips moving as if in prayer. Reporters waited outside. When Marden emerged, flashes blinded him. He shielded his eyes, stepping slowly down the stairs, police sirens echoing in the distance. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Marden, any words for the Harper family?" He paused for a second, then turned away, silent. Inside, Clara stood by a window, looking at the gray sky. Evelyn was wheeled beside her. She spoke softly, her voice weak but warm. "Justice came late, but it came." Clara nodded. "Yes, but at a cost. A lifetime for a few words of truth." Evelyn smiled sadly. "Sometimes those few words are worth a lifetime." The press dubbed March 18, 2024, Round Valley's Judgment Day. Images of Marden, head bowed in cuffs, appeared everywhere, on the front pages of the Washington Post, New York Times, and thousands of social media posts. A local paper wrote, "Hero and criminal, the same man, separated by 46 years." That evening, Clara left the courthouse after finalizing the last report. Trenton's light rain mixed with sleet, falling on the pavement. She paused on the steps, looking up at the faintly glowing copper dome. Marden's voice echoed in her mind. She loved me once, and her own, she trusted you once. She understood justice wasn't victory, it was a scar society must learn to carry. The price for what people thought they'd forgotten. The next day, in a Flemington hospital room, Evelyn Harper passed away in her sleep, still clutching the silver necklace. On the bedside table, that morning's paper was folded to the front page, bold headline, "Justice Finally for Linda Harper." Clara attended the visitation, placing a white lily beside a framed photo of Linda and Tommy. She stood silently for a long time. Outside, the rain had stopped, water droplets on the window reflecting the faint morning sun. Somewhere between the sky and the lake, Linda and her son were perhaps at peace. And Frank Marden, who once thought himself justice, would live out his days with the memory of his own guilt. Justice arrived, slow and heavy, without fanfare or glory, just silence. But in that silence, the truth had its voice. The story of Linda Harper and the nearly half-century quest for her justice is a profound reflection of modern American society, where justice exists but sometimes faces the inertia of systems, human fear, and silence. From a death disguised as a weather-related accident to Clara Ruiz's journey, a young investigator daring to confront the past and challenge the police establishment. This story reminds us that truth never vanishes, only waits for someone brave enough to look back. In today's America, where technology, media, and transparency movements are reshaping every field, the Harper case warns that justice cannot exist without personal moral accountability. Lieutenant Marden wasn't just a criminal. He symbolized how power can hide wrongdoing when people stay silent. Clara represents a new generation, those who believe reputation cannot stand above truth. Her words, "We don't need heroes, we need truth," are a message to every American dare to ask questions, even when the answers are uncomfortable. When the Clinton community etched "Found, Remembered, Never Forgotten" on a memorial plaque, they didn't just honor the victims but reminded each other that justice isn't a luxury. It's the foundation of societal trust. In today's world, every American, police officer, journalist, or ordinary citizen must carry this lesson: silence before injustice is a form of guilt. And only the courage to face the truth makes America stronger and more humane. If you believe truth never sinks, and justice always finds its way, hit subscribe to join us in exploring more cases awakened after decades of silence. Thank you for following Linda Harper's story. See you in the next episode, where another lake, another secret, is ready to rise from the darkness.